Joining us for this December Tableau User Group meeting by Boston. We are really excited for you. As I said previously, we have this fun hands-on session with you with Tim. So looking forward to all the learning we have today. Um, so the agenda for today is a quick Boston Tug news for you all. We have a leadership update, and then I'm going to hand it over to our guest speaker, Tim Pritchard, who is going to take us over the hands-on session and give us an insight about what Tableau Pulse is and all that good stuff. I am pleased to welcome Amy Wu to our Boston Tableau User Group leadership team. Amy is a business intelligence specialist at GILL, and Amy helps organizations create powerful dashboards and make data-driven decisions. She has been a two-time Tableau Community Forum ambassador, a two-time Biz of the Day recipient. And if you all, higher education folks or anybody else, have interacted with the EduWizards community project, it is fun, and Amy is one of the co-leads of that. So please join me in welcoming Amy. Yeah, she is not able to join us today, but I did not want to wait sharing this wonderful news. So we will have more exciting stuff planned for you for next year. So today we are going to talk about unlocking the power of Tableau Pulse. So the quick agenda for today's conversation is going to be about what is Pulse and how it can transform your organization. And having followed that, we are going to walk you through an immersive experience of creating these Pulse metrics. And to do that, today we have Tim. Tim has been a Tableau solution engineer for 8 years and has lived in Quincy, Dorchester area for past 5 with his wife and dog. He originally developed his fondness for Tableau through the calculator field editor. And Tim is thrilled to bring a new wave of low-lift analytic solutions to the customers via Tableau's new AI features such as Pulse and Agent. So welcome, Tim. We are really excited to have you here and for the session. I'm going to stop sharing here so you can share the screen. And
I'll take over. Thanks for having me.
no, thank you for joining us.
And I've got a similar kind of an agenda-ish slide. Although, in fact, before we get into that, I definitely want to circulate and confirm that we're all starting on the same page. So you can ignore the top part of my slide here, but at one point we ran this locally. Thank you for allowing me to deliver this again from the comfort of my home office. And I'm coming at you from Dorchester, as Preeti mentioned. So if you have not done so yet, an important first step of participating in today's class is go and get yourself a trial. If you have access to trial or to Tableau Cloud through your own professional lives, I think that's great. I think I may still encourage us to all follow a common script. I'm going to be doing exactly the same thing. We'll just work in like an incognito browser window. And hopefully, if you've been paying attention to the calendar invites, Preeti's been doing a great job keeping us organized, and everybody would have one of these. I've got eyes on the chat. I don't know if it makes sense to do like 1 if I have a trial, 0 if I don't have a trial. And in the meantime, this is a link that you can punch into your side and it will give you the rest of my slides. I'm not really going to use too many slides. I think I'll just operate in the product so we can watch and follow along. And that is really the name of the game today. It's a lot of, I mentioned I like low lift. It's very low lift for me today. It's going to be a brief demonstration of here's what you're going to do. And then we'll just cut you loose probably for 10 or so minutes at a time where you can participate and follow along with the guide that you'll find at this link. So very eager and happy to see any ones come through the chat. If you do have a 0, that's totally fair and fine. Like, we've got lots of time today. And it takes like a minute to create a Tableau Cloud trial. So fear not if you don't have one, but there will be early instructions in this guide on how to do that. And I'll skip through that in somewhat rapid fashion as we get going. As discussed or described, this is how today's going to go. It's going to be getting familiar with Tableau Pulse. This is our new feature, and we're going to make some stuff. So if you've seen Pulse, that's great. This will allow you to get hands-on. If you've not seen Pulse, that's also great because this will expose you to it. Pulse, without showing it, is a new medium for Tableau. You guys know what Tableau has been good for a while, helping people see and understand data. And the dashboard, or maybe even the web edit experience, if you weren't going to persist something, is a great environment to go and get curious against your data and ask and answer questions. And I've made it my privilege and profession to talk to people about that for the past 8 years. This is a new way to deliver information and insight. And it's kind of a departure from the build whatever snowflake you need sort of philosophical approach that we've taken for 20 some years. You may have noticed this as well, like with acquisition from Salesforce several years ago. We've started to come together, especially under the philosophy of meeting people, especially non-technical users where they work, so that you can get informed and have data-driven decision-making involved in your life. And your boss is going to be happy with that too, and so on and so forth up the chain. But this is a really powerful way to further lower the barrier to entry to doing that in the flow of work. You and I and the next person that probably comes to this session, we are the dashboard interested. I know that I'm going to spend 3 minutes sifting around in a dashboard, but it's going to save me 30 minutes in the long run because I've lived that life so many times over that it's easy to believe in. But there are a lot of people out there who don't have the patience or the interest or the confidence to do something like that. What if I spend 10 minutes digging around, playing around in this dashboard, and then I don't get anything out of it? Then that's 10 minutes gone down the drain that I'll never get back. And that's a very regular and valid fear. And so Tableau Pulse aims to bring data-driven insights into a very bite-sized, mobile-friendly, check it in your morning stock ticker kind of workflow way. It's a number, it's a date, and we're going to track those numbers over time. And that's an oversimplification of the value that it can provide, but we'll get to check it out thoroughly as we get going. So I'm going to power through these ones as far as setting up your Tableau Cloud site goes. Hopefully everybody's starting on the page that these will cover. And if you have not set up the Tableau Cloud site, do either consult this link that Preethi's so kindly put in the chat, and you'll get access to these slides. Certainly, you could probably just Google Tableau Cloud Trial, and you'll find the first hit will get you started. This will take about 3 minutes between you and your email and coming up with a password that's strong enough. But eventually, you will get into a Tableau Cloud site, and so that's where we're going to begin today's show. I think I'm gonna jump out of my slideshow here, and we can just get into what it looks like when you get it. All right, thank you, Wesley, for chiming in with the 0. And so I think in that case, if there is a direct message function, maybe Preethi, I can put you on the task of helping anybody who is not yet cloud trial site enabled set up with their own cloud site. That's a good question, Akash. I imagine, Preethi, we can distribute this recording afterwards.
Yes, the session is being recorded. We will plan to share it on the Tugs page and also on YouTube. So you should be able to find it.
Gotcha. And then I noticed another question came through. So if you've bumped into the case where it won't let you get a trial because either you've gotten too many trials historically or something along those lines, I think what we can probably do is we can probably do a little bit of buddying up. I might be able to add some users because this is same sort of idea. I just made up a fake character called Chuck McGee for the purposes of having a demo today. But I imagine too, I can add you to this environment. Might be a little bit of a sidecar adjacent experience. If we're building the exact same thing, Pulse is designed to not let you recreate the same version of the truth, which I think is a great feature. But if we find out that there's maybe only a couple people that are not allowed to create their own trial, we can definitely make arrangement to add you to mine here. And then you can just have a login. You might see something be created that you don't create yourself from scratch, but it'll be pretty easy to get the majority of the experience. So far, Elizabeth, I see you might be the only one in that bucket. Trying to make sure I've got my eyes on chat. Yeah, let us know how that goes using your work account. If you can create one, that's great. One of the downsides of this one is, as you can see, I made it like a week and a half ago, so it's going to die sooner than what you would create today. They come out of the box for 2 weeks and 25 users. So ideally, you have a good enough time with it and you want to bring it back to work and share it with your colleagues, etc. You'll have 2 weeks to do so if you create your own. But do follow up if that gives you additional problems. And perfect. Happy to hear that, Kat. Cool. So I'll drag my feet as we get going to hopefully buy a little bit of time for people to catch up. But effectively here, once you get into Tableau Cloud, you've got a blank slate. It does come with a couple of things in here. So there's a couple of projects. The default one has nothing in it. And the samples just has exactly what we see here, which is plenty for us to work with. All you need to get started with Pulse is a published data source. So that is kind of the only real requirement. A lot of the same 20 years of development are involved with how this feature works. You've got a published data source. We've got an engine built into our platform that's going to be able to query and make sense of that. And the Pulse feature itself will show us the necessary path to creating and taking advantage of the feature. So to get into Pulse, actually, I've skipped an important part already. My apologies. To get into Pulse, eventually you'll click the Tableau Pulse button, but chances are you don't have that button available to you right out of the gate. And so to turn it on, we will first go into settings, and it's on the same general page, just right after the top. We have a few different Tableau AI callouts here. So for today's class, we're just going to be looking at Tableau Pulse. Worth mentioning, this whole Tableau AI venture of ours is more than just Pulse. And so there's another thing in here, Tableau Agent. It will hopefully show up in a future user group or on an environment near you. For today, all we need to worry about is making sure that we've turned on Tableau Pulse. You'll notice, as far as if this were something you were going to pilot in your work environment, if you're an admin, right, you can turn on a pilot group or a subset of users that are allowed access to the feature outright. And then making sure that we've ticked this first box of several, that most of which are grayed out. These other three do correspond to the Tableau Agent feature, and you need to have some extra infrastructure, as you can tell, in order to hook that up. So all we need to do is make sure that the two boxes are checked in the general settings for turning on Tableau Pulse and turning on the AI summaries. An important piece of Tableau AI is that they implement AI within our platform. And so you would be able to, without this feature, without this latter box ticked, you would be able to use Pulse. I still think it's actually quite valuable for the medium it is, the mobile friendly and eligibility nature to it. It's a different way of interfacing with your data and asking and answering questions than a dashboard. And it performs certain analyses like change in a number over time, period over period, year over year. It does those in very easy, out of the box ways that would be maybe not difficult, but tedious to create again and again and again as a desktop creator user. Those are going to come without the LLM behind it. We do have a secure platform, which I'm happy to follow up on or share some resources on. Probably adjacent or beyond the scope of today's workshop. We call it the Einstein Trust Layer, and it's so that we will be able to interface with an LLM in a secure manner. We're not going to take any of the data. Of course, we're working with dummy data today, but we're not going to take any of your data and go and send it out to ChatGPT to chew on. We recognize that that's a big gap in the industry in general of using AI securely. And so we're very platform and security framework minded in all of our implementations, including this one. Enough plumbing. Once you've turned these on, you will be able to access Tableau Pulse on the left-hand sidebar. It's going to look kind of lonely as we get started. My agenda covered, we will spend the rest of the time building stuff. And so you can probably guess where we're going to go next. We're going to be looking to create a new metric definition. I'll come through as we give you time to go and follow along and talk about, what is a metric versus a metric definition when you use capital M, capital D. These are kind of important, nuanced technical points to better understanding the feature, maybe not necessarily taking advantage of the value of it. So again, we have a data source that comes pre-populated on this Tableau Cloud site. It's the Superstore data source. And so that's going to be, we're forced into this workflow, maybe different than working in web authoring. There's no, it's not up to you to determine what the visual output looks like. This is very fixed, very on rails as far as what it's designed to look like. And I think that's for better and rather than for both better and worse. We still have the dashboard, and this is going to act as a very nice complement to Tableau of the past 20 some years, right? Like once I uncover a top level insight from Pulse, maybe the next thing I want to do is investigate it further. And if Pulse is not going to suffice for diving deep into a custom exploration, you know what will. And so that we'll talk about some best practices for involving dashboards, maybe in these descriptions here. As I build these Pulse metrics, maybe I've got an associated dashboard I want people to take their follow-up questions to, or it's a web edit session, like a link. I could just copy paste a link here, and then future users of this Pulse KPI will be able to dive further as needed. These are, I think, precursors to features that will actually properly develop formally in the long term. This product or feature is really only about a year old. So as we get started, I think what we're looking at is the Superstore data set. I think revenue is just a classic, easily accessible metric that we're going to look to pull out of here and keep an eye on. In this case, you can describe however you want. This is the description. We'll see what that looks like and where that shows up. Again, this is something that we might come back to in the future and thicken with additional links and resources. A little bit of governance. We're going to skip this for today. We're all going to exist in the confines of our own, Tableau worlds here. That I think we've done primarily from an ease of all playing along to a common song sheet. As I mentioned, if I go and create what will become or what this revenue KPI will become, and then you go and try to create it, the product would not let you. If you have one in a site, Tableau is going to keep track of that. And if I go to the same data source, I grab the same field with the same aggregate, even if I called it something different, Tableau would recognize, hey, you may want to tune into revenue as Tim created it last week because that's what you're looking for. We're going to force you back onto that common source of truth, which I'm a fan of because a classic problem when I work with customers is we've created so many of the same darn thing. Ad hoc can be the Wild West sometimes, and we want to make sure that we're providing functionality and guardrails where applicable and appropriate to keep things as manageable as possible. So not only are there some built-in features that will keep you attached to the source of truth, we do get some governance capabilities, again, which we'll skip today. For value, this is going to take a glimpse into my data set. And so if you've used Superstore before, hopefully looking very familiar, I'm going to grab the sales value and we'll just look to aggregate that cumulatively over time. As a default, we're going to attach a sum to it. We're going to put a running total behind that. And so again, cumulative aggregation. I do get to change this, and we'll change this in future examples as well. You've got to pick a time field. For all intents and purposes for Superstore demos, I've always chosen order date. That's in our case, we've got two date fields, the date when an order was placed versus the date when an order was shipped. Certainly there would be uses of that other date field, but for our demo dummy tracking purposes, we're going to be looking at when orders were placed. And so we have booked so much money. I suppose a real data set might also have, payment received date. And hopefully we're just going to assume that all comes into this company. But I've got a look over time. When I'm in this editor space, as we identify the necessary building blocks, it will expose, once we have chosen a number and a date field. This may look weird if the context of what you're after is not month to date appropriate. This is always going to be month to date. When we get into a finished, published metric definition, we will see that we have the option, and any user has the option to chop this up in a different fashion, year to date, week to date, what happened today, what happened last week, things like that. Month to date is just the default for how it shows when we're building. I do have a little bit of opportunity to adjust, not a whole heck of a lot of opportunity. It's just period over period and year over year, but you can choose which of those are prioritized. We'll see how that actually exposes in a moment after we publish this. We're going to skip over the advanced definition for the advanced part of today's workshop. And at this point, it's really just thickening what people and the statistics beneath this feature have access to in terms of understanding this number and what combines to produce it. So I have these metric filters, which operate, I think, in two ways. And I think the takeaway is load it up. As many filters as you can possibly think would be relevant. I think that's okay. I've noticed from my delivering these Superstore examples, I only have so many fields to choose from oftentimes. And so I end up with, maybe 4 or 5 of these filters. When I use Tableau Pulse internally, because we use our own products, I have 24 filters as available to me, depending on how I'd like to chop it up. Some of that is just for practicality's sake. I am Tim I sell to manufacturing enterprise accounts, and I'm just one such small potato in the grand scheme of Salesforce. And so I've got to apply a lot of filters to get to my small section of the business when I'm tracking myself. But perhaps more importantly than allowing me to cut into what is interesting to me, or maybe even beneath what is relevant to my jurisdiction in Salesforce, there are probably additional filters that I'd like to isolate to and figure out, are these better or worse customers or opportunities, or have I been doing a good job of logging my record keeping, for administrative purposes internally, we keep track of everything. More importantly, these filters will allow the statistics to cut into your data set. So if you've ever used explain data, which we've retitled to the data guide, it's the same concept. We've got a bunch of statistical algorithms that will apply against your data set under the hood. I can actually kind of fast forward and take a look at what some of these would be, right? These are trends or unexpected or outlier values, or probably more relevant to the output of Pulse, what were the top 3, 5 elements of this field that contributed more to the whole than the others? Which of these are the key players within this analytics story that we want to let you know about? And so those statistics can only operate when we give, in this metric filter section, the machine all of these different attributes to actually use and leverage to cut into the data set. So again, I'm living in dummy land, so we'll only have a few to choose from here, but presumably I want to grab my category and my subcategory, and maybe even the manufacturer of the various products and product hierarchy in this store data set. I want to check out the regions and states and the geography of how this analytics story might break down. Different ship modes might be important, or segments, specific customers, right? We can load this shelf up pretty much with everything down to, I suppose we could involve specific line items. It wouldn't provide maybe a very interesting story. I suppose it could be valuable in, hey, here's the one line item in your data set that is different than the others. But I think that concept is captured really by this sort of insights and the feature in general, and just all of this being relational data under the hood anyway, and our being able to query relational data for the past 20 years with some confidence and some accuracy. So for today's class, we'll just leave it at these. I'll probably be grabbing these similarly for all the examples, and we'll see how they. Number format, this is just a very simple, let's keep it attached to the story we're telling, one of revenue, we'll keep it in US dollars. And then finally, over on this Insights tab, we have a couple of options to influence the sentiment of what Pulse is going to give back to us. So when revenue goes up, we like it. And so we will be able to address a favorable suggestion, although it looks like maybe everything's decreasing in my dummy data set. We'll find out when we publish. And then being able to use some of these insight types requires a little bit of extra information. So you can turn this part off very easily if you were working in a capacity where you didn't know. We also have the convenient inclusion in the Superstore data set of something called row ID. And so that would be very useful for identifying a specific record within this data set. So if it were that order ID was the full grain of the data set, I'd pick order ID here. In my case, for Superstore, it's really a line item within an order. So it's kind of the combination of order ID and product ID, or conveniently in modern Superstore, we just throw the ID in there. So I don't know if I would, call this anything in particular. It certainly doesn't have a name as derived from the data set, so I'll leave that that blank. I think record is fine. It could be, order line item. These semantics will show up in the text that Tableau Pulse is going to deliver back to you. And really, I'm not going to do anything else. I have the option to turn off certain insight types. I think this is probably more of an iterative type of decision. I haven't found myself adjusting this too much in my own practice, but I suppose if you wanted to encourage or you expected a scenario to prefer a certain type of insight, turning off the other ones would maybe be a decent practice so that you could kind of force users to interface with that type of insight that you think is most useful for productivity. In my case, let's just see how they all work. We'll hit definition. So pretty similar. It's going to come out of the can as a month-to-date value. But I have Pulse in front of me, and this will be something that we explore now. I guess I'll cut you loose. I'm going to hit the follow button to make sure. I'm going to keep track of this one. Also see in a minute after we built this, how we can create related metrics, maybe children of this overall metric definition. I'll come back to that in a bit. But once you've followed it, you can click over to your Tableau Pulse homepage, and now you have more than just a blank slate. This is the first of several that we'll build throughout today's workshop. So that is how my side of the story goes. So it's up to you to do some work. Maybe you've been following along and happy to check in, take any questions. Maybe you've not. Now is your opportunity to spend the next 10 minutes or so and redo. If you consult the guide that we had in the that bit.ly link, you'll see these slides will also encourage you to walk through things like the Pulse and notice what's out there. So if you do want to learn a little bit more, feel free to take a peek at these slides, and they'll cover off on some of the bits of the UI, some of the different features that you can access that are kind of maybe tangential to what we just heard. Maybe that's a good backdrop. Thank you for sharing that. Now would be a great time. We can't get into a trial. We'll have 10 minutes or so to write your ship.
Tim, I do have a question on Q&A for you.
I'm just seeing it. Good question, Jackie. Can pulse metrics be used in a dashboard? They can. And so we'll find, much like the lower left corner, lower left for you is lower left corner when you're working in like web edit, building a dashboard, you'll have the ability to grab a pulse object very specifically. I suppose if you wanted to, you embedded in a web page object, seen it done, and that can bring for you the full experience if you wanted to dedicate enough real estate to that. I think that's maybe a little bit away from looking at the experience Pulse as it is. And there's a little bit of formatting. Do you want to put the whole thing in here? Do you want to put there's kind of like a condensed version of the number and then a brief spark line without as much detail.
Thank you. That is awesome.
You decide when to build a dashboard with metrics and when to build a pulse metric. It's a good question. Certainly that that workflow. And a lot of today's class is going to feature a very similar looking output. Number over time, you can click into it and get one layer into things. I'll kind of come back and kind of demonstrate, what you can get within the break that if you know that you're looking at designing an experience where someone's going to be digging deeper and deeper and deeper, a dashboard may even be required at together, right? A pulse metric comes together very quickly compared to a dashboard, gives you some analytics that would be a little more tedious to create as far as the change over time analyses and the contributors to those changes. I think that's one of the more analytically like powerful or convincing or rigorous pieces of this is the contributors to Delta, which is not super convenient to create as a creator user. So certainly if you're after contributors to change over time in an important KPI, Pulse is like, there's definitely start with Pulse. As your use case thickens or becomes more custom or requires iterative depth into a data source, that's probably more of a dashboard type of use case. Of course, they can work together pretty nicely as well. I love all the questions coming through. Another question with regarding massive data sources. Have you experienced slower render times with big sources? Is there a way to pre-filter the source? So the answer is probably yes to both. I don't know if I've experienced bad Pulse performance at all, just because, for one, I work many times in a dummy vacuum where I use Superstore and other things like that. I think where I do use it for real, it's in internal and fairly governed use cases where I don't really get to see how the sausage is made. It's more, I'm a consumer and I have to trust that our analytics team is using our products to the best of their abilities and the product's ability. Within data sources, you've got a lot of capabilities to keep things trimmed down. The data source could have a filter, right? I think that's probably the first thing to think about. If the data source itself does not need to have absolutely everything, maybe leave most of it in the database and use the Tableau data source file to filter what isn't needed. I think it's valid to have where you do need a rich in history data set that goes, several years and in great detail back into everything that you would need to possibly look up. For one, that's not going to be a great data set for Pulse because Pulse is not really designed to do that historical look. It's very in the moment we are in and as things change day by day. So I think it would be valid to take that historical super huge data set and just have a copy of it. You could even automate the updating of a copy of it by using a Tableau prep flow that grabs the first published data source and says, well, all we're going to do is we're going to trim it down to 1 year of data or 2 years of data. I think 2 years of data would, in theory, be the most that Pulse would ever have access to. As we get into exploring, cutting up the, instead of month to date, the different time periods that we can use to look into Pulse, you can only get last year and year over year. So in theory, a data point that was 3 years old is never really going to be accessible to Pulse anyway, since we don't have a show me 2 years ago, year over year button. And so that, quite simply, more than any other thoughtful reason, could be, the motivation to have a replicate data set that is smaller for the purposes of using Pulse successfully. But ultimately, we've got the same engine under the hood that's doing the querying. It's VizQL, and it tends to be very capable of only grabbing what is needed. So Pulse is not going to go and say, all right, let's bring in all 10 years of data. Now what do we need to do with it? It's going to go and write a query that says, give me last year's data, roll it up, give me the the roll up from the year prior. What's that divided by the other? What's the percent delta? So I think your mileage always varies, and we don't really have hard limits. And so, of course, there exists some scale as you approach infinity that can slow things down. A lot of opportunity to be mindful ahead of running into that problem. And when you run into that problem, it's pretty easy to trim things down behind the scenes and clean things up. Now, if you find yourself working today in this workshop and things are going slowly, let's hear about it. And because I wouldn't suspect that you would bump into that. We're all going to work on the same infrastructure anyway, being that this is Tableau Cloud, software as a service, and the Superstore data set is very lightweight. It's like 10,000 rows of data. Is there any flexibility to tweak what dates are used for the prior year? In my organization, the prior year value falls on the same week of year and day of week rather than the same calendar day. That is a wonderful question. And unfortunately, I don't have facility for that right now. So it's very common right now for Pulse to be noticing I work for a company that uses the 13 period annual calendar. We do 454 or 445. These have always thrown Tableau a bit of a curveball, and for sure people have done some amazing work to make dashboards that respect the logic of that calendar style, but it's a lot of work. And so we don't have that right now for Tableau Pulse because it's common and popular. It is hot on the the roadmap. I don't know what the development progress is as far as like when we're looking to ship something that would cater to more customized calendars. At the moment, all we have is like offset days. It's more for managing when your data doesn't arrive on time. So, this takes us 2 days to actually land in the database. Report on today -2. And so that's as much as we've developed beyond what came out of the box in V0. But we're about 1 year into it, or approaching 1 year as we wrap this fiscal year up, having launched in February. And you can join a lot of the community members in voting for that one on our website. I'll throw you a vote as well, because that one is very important to a lot of my customers and our customers generally. And I'm now seeing, good call, that kind of lag related use case. Pulse out of the box does respect what Gregorian day it is right now. And so it's December 11th for me. So Pulse is always going to show me December 11th. Side note, that makes for demoing in the first week of the month very frustrating for me because it rolls around to the 1st and all I have is a single data point because I leave all my stuff as month to date. But for the situation where I have a lag in the arrival of organized data that's ready to be reported on, we do have a feature for that. So you should be covered if you're in such a boat. And we can, once I get back on the in the product on my screen, we can take a look at what that looks like. And when our more date feature is going to be released is a wonderful question with a terrible answer. All the time. The good news about Tableau Cloud and certainly where we're putting our focus from a philosophical and marketing perspective, we can roll feature releases out like all the time. Every couple of weeks, there's an update to Tableau Cloud. And with that often comes updates, especially lately. This year, I'm sure we've hit pretty much every one of them for Pulse, for Agent, for all this Tableau AI stuff that we're doing right now. So I think what we can plan on doing is we can set up a follow-up, and I'd be happy to do it, where I come to a future user group meeting and I'll be a little smarter on what our 2025 roadmap for Pulse and Tableau AI generally looks like. I figure if you wanted me to come in today, then maybe I can earn another follow-up by not having all the answers today. All right. So I've got a couple chats. One more question came in. How do I follow the metric I've just created? And that's a great question that I'll use to segue me back into to taking us a little bit further into the workshop. So I have a convenient story. I clicked the follow button when I had it available to me. You may not have, and instead, you wouldn't be able to see it from here. You'd be back on your home screen and go, great, I lost what I'd created. Couple ways to get back into it. Of course, browse metrics is going to let you see all that's available to you. This builds off of the permission structure that exists with regard to data sources. So as I kicked off the class, we have the Superstore data source. That is the required raw material for Pulse. Those permissions that govern those data sources carry their jurisdiction through to Pulse usage. So if I don't have visibility or connect access into a data source, I wouldn't be able to create Pulse metrics. Similarly, I wouldn't be able to see the related content. We won't have that to worry about, more just a knowledge transfer while we're all here. So hopefully it's a very simple list. If you did create and save the revenue metric definition, you should have access to it in this browse metrics section. Certainly, we should be able to find it as well if we search for it. I think this is a decent time to expose or discuss a distinction between metric and metric definition. So what I have here is a metric. It is month-to-date revenue. I'm clicked into what we'll call the metric detail page. This is where we see the overview, the breakdown, right? This is, again, the machine can only be as useful as all of those metric filters that I allow it access to. Similarly, if I wanted to create additional metrics, that's what these are. If I create a filtered cut or a forked off child of my month-to-date revenue, that is my creating another metric. So perhaps the consumer segment is my territory, and I really only care about the consumer segment month-to-date revenue. Very easy for me to create this as a separate metric. And again, I'll be able to follow it. I can add followers. Another shout out here to our permissions and kind of governance world. If you are the admin or you find yourself building and assigning and permissioning out these in your own work, group level permissions, I think, again, come into play as a good practice here. That tends to be the case generally with Tableau, where you can create groups of users and apply permissions to content associated with those groups. It leaves you the ability to specify a user that maybe needs to have a different permission, but also allows you to paint with a bit of a broader brush and not do the same thing a billion times. So definitely I'd be able to find, well, I don't have any groups on here because I just created the trial environment, but were we to have groups, we'd be able to add them as followers. In my case, maybe this is something we can do. Create your own little forked child version of your metric, and then also click the follow button. And so we'll see when we go back to the home page, hopefully. Oh, I think I unfollowed the first one, but you can see I'm now following the consumer cut. So this is a metric. What is a metric definition? So when I first created it, and when I was on the home page, you can see new metric definition. And so that's kind of the parent metric, so to say. So I would have access to this by saying, well, I guess I could say browse metrics based on this definition. This is something that I got to by clicking the little info button. I did that kind of quickly. I should probably say what I'm going to do and then do it. So when you are looking at a particular metric detail, you can click on this little eye that will allow you to jump into all of the related metrics associated with that definition. This also allows you to adjust that definition. So the definition is the top level. That's my choosing what date field, what metric field, how I'd like to aggregate that, as well as what metric filters I would like to allow people to access. And then through use of those metric filters, users across the environment, could be me in this case, because it's only me, but could be a whole community of people, will create this whole library of related metrics associated with the definition. In practice, this screen becomes extraordinarily messy, and that's valid. That's totally cool. It's not a screen that you should plan to spend a lot of time on unless you're just maybe going for an excursion to see what other people are looking at and what might exist for you to follow. As I mentioned before, if you found yourself creating the same cut that may already exist here, like someone else went into this one and they said, oh, I should follow the consumer business, and I went in to create, I went in to create just the consumer version, we would not be creating the same thing. We'd rather find ourselves just looking at this one that had already been created. You'd see so-and-so, Chuck McGee's already following it. I'd like to follow it too. So this will grow over time. If you add it as a metric filter, like employee name, right? You might have one for every employee. Filter to Tim Pritchard, create that for me. Nobody else would follow it, maybe my boss. But it's perfectly valid and part of the game to really inflate this UI. Importantly, you'll always have the ability to edit and delete stuff at the top. These child metrics can proliferate considerably. All right, so I'm going to make sure I'm following that first one. I don't know if it will matter, but just for the sake of us having a consistent look and feel to things, we should be following the month-to-date revenue, as well as some other metric that you've created from that metric definition revenue. And now we're going to do a little bit more of an advanced build within the metric definition workflow. I am noticing that there's a couple Q&As. Just going to take a quick peek at those before I completely abandon you guys. Are row level security functions allowed as filters for each metric? That's a lovely question. Or metric definition. We're going to find out. I've never done that. And for good reason. I haven't done that because build that into the data source and you're good. So the use case is maybe not super frequent that you would find yourself building that within this workflow. That would probably be, I want that as a data source filter in the published data source so that any downstream content is subject to, honestly, I want that in the virtual connection if I have that available to me, and then possibly the data source. And then finally, we'll take a crack at seeing if it's even allowed in here. So it's a fine question. And then question on the forums, Pulse in Spanish. Fantastic question. I have to follow up on that one. I anticipate it's very nearly due, if not even possibly released. I have vague recollection of seeing, again, these come out every couple of weeks. So there was something in there that said like, we've released something for languages. So that's another one I'll maybe earn the right to come back here and talk to you guys again, since I don't know all the answers. Let me actually note these down. Spanish Pulse. Good question. All right. And then user functions. That one we can test today. Let's make another metric definition. Same story, we'll hop into Superstore. And the purpose of this is to progressively show a little bit more of the advanced side of this. Advanced could be in quotation marks. If you yourself have spent years in Tableau desktop, this only gets so advanced, right? Pick a thing. We've built it for you. In my case here, I think we want to call this one high priority sales. And so this tracks revenue, but only for certain stuff. How useful. Same story here. We're going to grab sales, sum of sales, cumulative sum of sales, I suppose, if we wanted to, right? Like it's easy to do daily sales as well. Order date. So this should be looking very familiar for now. In this case, it is a slight upgrade in terms of advanced technical ability. There's another button you can click to further define your metric definition. And so hopefully this is appropriate to follow the distinction between metric definition and metric itself beneath those definitions. This allows us to apply filters that would never be visible to the users from the data set to define my metric definition. That's why they are definition filters. And so the definition of high priority in the context of my fake story here is first class and same day shipments. So all the other stuff we don't need to worry about. And it's not a situation where I want to maybe give that as the a metric filter ability to a user of the previous revenue metric that we created. This one, we just want to tighten up a little bit better because in accordance with our business rules, that's what high priority sales are. We don't want anybody else to discover, an inconsistency because they did it wrong. So I have defined it to those two ship modes. And then it's going to be a very familiar routine coming through and loading this up with really whatever it is. It doesn't, the order will matter in how it exposes to the user and how you play and, your real scenario. You probably want some consistency here. We won't enforce it. It's really just going to go in the order that you add them. And so here we'll go and add them. In my case, ship mode may be useful. I guess it's probably important to be able to look into those two ship modes that I had identified. US dollars, currency, high priority sales. We like that going up. Darn it, lots of red again. Punch in my row ID just in case there are particular outliers. And we're good. So I suppose this is an intermediate example, but still quite simple. We're doing the same thing, getting real familiar with just the workflow and what it's asking of us. Again, I might follow this one so that I can keep an eye on things. What is better or worse? First class? Well, they're all bad. And in fact, same day shipments are incredibly down. And we'll be able to learn what we need to from Pulse. So just as a bit more of an exploration of what Pulse itself is going to enable in terms of question and answer and understanding of the data set, we're going to be, I think, doing two concepts of things. We'll be breaking down the full aggregate. So this is, right, whatever I had broken down by individual attributes that we've allowed users to access. And then I think maybe even more powerfully, decreased, increased, being able to capture the delta for what period over period it concerns us. In this case, it's just month to date over month to date. Year, I guess in this case, month to date, year over year. So from the same month to date of last year, same month to date of the prior month. And we can adjust this and chop it up in a number of different ways. Ultimately, this decreased increase will be able to dynamically capture what the delta was, but more importantly, what the contributors to the delta were. And that's the actionable piece of this. I want to go and do something with regard to the corporate segment because I see this bar as opposed to the consumer segment, which actually is doing quite well. Cubify is a product group, and I need to make sure that whoever is the, I don't know, I guess this would be these are manufacturers, sorry. So the manufacturer, Cubify, probably has a partner manager somewhere in my company. I want to go talk to them and maybe take a closer look at their data and figure out if they're giving insane discounts away or some weird thing that makes them not like the others. So pretty zero barrier to entry, and we're able to derive action from being able to cut into these aggregates by the metric filters that we've chosen. As you might imagine, this is very mobile friendly. So the Tableau mobile app is very Pulse forward right now. In fact, you can make Pulse your landing page. I quite like using the mobile app because you can kind of voice to text. All right, tell me what I feel cooler that way. And it gives you the answer, right? It would say, you have to stick to the script as far as addressing fields that are available to you, increase, decrease, high, low, right? Those are kind of our version 1 ask questions, asking about trend as well as part of this. Everything that we saw on those insight types panel when we were building the metric definition, that's what comes through in terms of what can be exposed here. So now we've got 3 in here. Go do it if you haven't. I'm going to take another peek at the Q&A in the chat. Is Tableau Pulse HIPAA compliant? It's an interesting question, and I'll preface it that way because I'm not sure I fully appreciate what HIPAA compliance looks like. Tableau Cloud is HIPAA compliant. There's a shared responsibility in that, though, because I think just because we have the architecture and infrastructure and security process surrounding it to make it such that we are secure for healthcare use cases, I feel like our technology would still allow some malicious actor to go and, I don't know, upload a CSV of people's names and information, and then it's data in the system. So I want to say the answer is yes. Pulse isn't going to do anything differently than what Tableau has been able to do in the past, other than how it exposes the insights and information that it's gathering from your data sources. So being that Pulse operates using a published data source as its main material, its input material, if the Tableau published data source is legit and protected, then everything you do with Pulse will be as well. So I'll say yes, but I feel like someone could break that rule if they really wanted to, if that's a fair way to answer the question. And to further that, I think this gets a little bit beyond the scope of today's class, but as far as how this works, we have on maybe the very last slide in the bit.ly hands-on deck or PDF guide, there's a glimpse, an image of our Einstein trust layer. Einstein, if you've been in the Salesforce sphere of influence for a while, we like to use that branding. Lately, it comes to mean everything AI that we're doing. And the Einstein platform is a series of checkpoints and processes that every Salesforce derived prompt would go through, so that whenever Salesforce or Tableau or Slack or any of these other brands that live within the Salesforce umbrella, whenever they interface with an LLM to power a feature, it's doing so securely and not exposing anything. So these are checkpoints like take out all the personally identifiable information, obfuscate things, or put in placeholders, full name 1, full name 2, instead of one name and the other name. To be honest, that example doesn't even show up in Pulse, because all that Pulse is actually doing is it's going to grab the name of the metric, or right. So the name of the metric in my case is revenue or high priority sales, or whatever the case is that we've titled it. It's perfectly precisely human entered. It's not even pulling from the data source, and the delta. So plus 151%, minus 1.2%, minus 54.3%. This is, of course, as you might imagine, where you would be able to prioritize year over year showing up on this summary card, as opposed to, in my case, I left it as the default period over period. Those are the only elements that actually are fed into the LLM when you're using Pulse and the LLM feature that we tick the box on. It's not going to show me a lot because it updated as we built the very first one, but on a daily basis for every user, our insight summary will update, and that's an LLM call. So it'll take a look at all of the things that each user has built into their digest here. So by the end of today's class, maybe we'll have 4 or 5 of these, and it will go and look at the names and the deltas. And we have a prompt template that kind of wraps around and says something to the effect of, hey, ChatGPT, got some names and numbers coming at you. Bring these back to me in an exciting, prioritized manner, right? So this month, revenue is up by 150%. Like if we had something else, returns soared to new heights, but right, it's going to dress the language up in a little bit more friendly and sentiment-inspired way, according to how we've built these metric definitions. But again, it's only given access to the delta and the metric name when you're using Pulse. So with all the good things that come out of the Einstein trust layer, we're hardly taking advantage of it. but rest assured, what we're doing with an LLM is secure. We're not going to be letting it dig into data or even letting it think about data, right? We don't want to rely on an LLM for doing analysis either. It can't even count how many of a certain character shows up in a word. Did you see that one about strawberry? Like, gets ChatGPT can't figure out how many R's are in strawberry. So Tableau has a good engine for querying your data and coming to an accurate result. The LLM is really just for the conversational layer, being able to build a personalized experience for a non-technical user. We want everybody to be able to take advantage of this. I think we can probably go through like maybe 2 more examples. I took some notes here, so that's what I'm consulting. Talked about metrics versus definitions. These are not so important in material, but I'm a nerd and I like the specifics of these things, so I like to communicate it where I can. Metric filters versus definition filters. I suppose it'd be easy for me to do something like this and come to the same conclusion. This is my original definition for revenue. I would require I at least give our users access to this ship mode concept. But what's the difference between, sorry, the first and the second? I think this should give me the same stuff, right? So one of these is I use the metric definition, I use the definition filter to insist that it is only these 2 ship modes that are allowed into the definition of this high priority sales metric. This one is revenue by first class and something else. So I think on one hand, like there's just a look and feel to it that I think I probably prefer when we used the definition to define it and we called it something else. It's a little easier to discern that this is what this is versus I have to look a little bit closer to understand how this is exactly the same thing. This adds human capability, for better and worse, to the puzzle, right? If I only chose same day and called that high priority sales, that might mean high priority to me, but it may not to the company and our dictionary, as we're all trying to sing from a common song sheet. So I don't think there's any like it must be done this way or the other way. Right? There's benefit to this way and the flexibility it provides. What if I wanted to look at pretty high priority sales and pick, second class instead of standard shipping? I have the ability to create that for myself. In a self-service data culture, maybe we're going to favor doing things that way rather than I can't touch it as an end user. I just need to understand what's been defined for me. But more of an exposure of the 2 ways to get there as opposed to telling you that one is correct, one is incorrect. If I had to choose, define it. I like this way a little bit better. From a row level security standpoint too, this concept can come into play. I know there was a question about row level security that I didn't follow up on. We should actually test shortly to see if that works.
it looks like we lost Tim. I assume he's probably trying to rejoin, so we'll give him a few minutes.
I guess while we have a minute, we should just say that the Tableau conference talk submissions went live today. So if you would like to give a talk, you should submit it. Also, visionary nominations are also live until the beginning of January. So if you know any great ambassadors you'd like to nominate, now's the time.
And you can also apply if you think that you want to be a visionary. So don't hesitate to apply, whether you're nominated or not. It's always good to be able to put in the work that you're doing that other people may not see, like mentoring and things like that.
It looks like Tim is back in. Just need to make him a presenter.
Sorry about that, everyone. I was talking such a big game about my internet in the pre-meet as well with Brian and Preeti. Thank you for re-enabling me. Hopefully that was time to take a break as scheduled and catch up on some of what we'd shown and poke around a little bit. In my absence, was there interest to get back into it right where I left off? Happy to share and just keep going. I was probably recently discussing how you can do these really in a couple of different ways. I think I was going to make a nod to the row level security question from earlier. Let's suppose, I mean, this is another one where it depends on the company culture, but you need to take your data set for revenue and deliver it to two groups, the Americas group and the European group. If it's such that Europe and America can see each other's data, maybe it's no big deal to do it the other way, where we've really just given them revenue and let everybody chop it up for themselves. If it is such that I definitely don't want to show America's data to Europe and vice versa, then we have to go this method where, well, we don't have to. There's other ways to do it. Presumably we could have two different data sources that are filtered accordingly, but probably we would just have two different pulse metrics filtered accordingly by definition. Let's make one more. and then I'll return you to your original programming. So this one, I think, let's call this average days to ship. As indicated, there were 2 dates in our data set, ship date, order date. How long did it take to get out the door? In this case, I can maybe start here. We'll end up moving past this, but it's worth knowing I could refer to certain things here. I can do some sort of calculation, like if I wanted to count the number of something. We do have that availability, count the number of regions, kind of a boring situation in this data set. We've seen, of course, we can take measures and aggregate them, and like you have a bunch of different choices for doing so. But we need to create a calculation, right? Presumably, this is another thing that I would have built into the data source. I can save in my published data source the calculated field, days to ship, and then it's something I can just find from this list. But for the sake of demoing all parts of this platform, we're going to click into the advanced analytics editor for anything where we're going to need to make a calculation. That's precisely what this is going to allow us to do. It's pretty familiar looking. It's not nearly as capable as the web edit Tableau desktop space. It only allows you to make these things, and it doesn't really persist anything either. So I'll be able to, I can do some of the same stuff we did before, right? Sales over time, that's very easy to do here. In my case, I need to create a calculated field for days to ship. It's a very easy calculation. It's ship date minus order date. If you didn't know, while we do have these date diff functions that would allow you to say like, all right, what is the amount of minutes between these 2 fields? Shorthand date minus date gives you days as your answer. So this will give me a number of days for every row in the data set, which is good and bad. It's a fact, it's what it is. It may be bad because if I need to track how long orders took to ship, that's actually something I need to have on a higher level of detail. In our case, to get around that, I think we can just average it. But we would be able to create like level of detail expressions, things like that if we wanted to. And maybe we'll do that as a final example. So this is average days to ship is going to be about 4 across the data set. That's good. And then we need to go and figure out, what was I think I'll just use the order data again. Whatever I do here is kind of irrelevant. It's not going to look like this. And maybe for the purposes of my building things out and knowing what I'm getting into, it would help me to show this at the daily level. Whatever the case is, Pulse is going to work the way it's going to work. All we're doing here is giving it the identity of the order date field to work with. Now, filters, I think, are interesting and important to think about here. Maybe not super common, but I think there's probably some clever practices to come back to, and we'll take a look at that in a final example. In my case, I've created average days to ship. I cannot accumulate these like running average, running sum once I've used the advanced editor. What you've done in there is what you get, and you get a daily aggregate, right? So this number is going to bounce around 4 and then average to 4. This 3.8 is different from the 3.9 something that we saw when I was in the editor before I'd broken it out by day, because this is the month to date average. Same story here, right? We can, from a clicking as few times as possible perspective, I'm not going to load this up, but you would. Number of days is a number of days. I feel like we could probably say days. That's going to show up like right here. It took that many days. And the value going up in this case, we don't like the value to go up. And similarly, we'll look at the row ID. All right. So in this case, we've got days to ship, and we've used the calculated field editor. I'm going to jump through one quick example, and then I'll wrap it up. And so the rest of the time will be for your ability to follow along or to get back to regular user group wrapping up business. But I'm going to go into that editor one more time And I'm going to think about how we might want to use a filter. I've done this one in the past. Big wins. What constitutes a big win? Well, it's something that we've won, and it's probably above a certain size. And this introduces a wrinkle into our operation that is different than what we've encountered so far, because that condition is numeric in nature. Yeah, I'm sure I could build into the published data source, and maybe if it is in line with our company culture to do so, we might always do this anyway, where it's built into the data source of, is it a big win or not, right? We've persisted some true false Boolean value to each order or line item, and then I can just count up the ones where it equals true. That's not in this data set. And so presumably we may want to create that using the advanced analytics editor, and specifically using this filter shelf. So I can see like counting the distinct number of orders. Oops, there's actually something I need to build as a calculated field. So number of orders, count distinct order ID. This would give me number of orders and something that I can track as my my metric. Bing, we'll bring that up here for measure. And then I want to grab my date field. We saw before that we're just going to use the order date every time. And then I only want to count orders according to a certain condition. And so this is where, making sure that we can identify, maybe it's a per order, something like this, right? Like fixed to the order ID, order ID, where the profit is greater than 300. I think 300 will be a reasonable value to use in this data set. Each line item represents an order, or excuse me, a product within an order whose profit tends to be between like -100 and +100. And there are occasionally some that are upwards of 1,000. And so hopefully this will trigger enough to produce a usable result here. But what we're doing here is putting in a condition that may not itself exist in the upstream. A lot of the other examples where I find myself demoing this filtering capability, it's like, well, why couldn't I have just put that in the published data source? I don't know. Most of the time you can. But for situations where you can't, and maybe it's this conditional numeric, I have to benchmark something using a number. That's the best I've got for why you need to have this, and why you may want to use this, and how you may use it in clever fashion. This would now become that element of my data set that I can just say, keep the ones where we've won big and show me those over time. So hopefully I did that correctly. 100 orders in the most recent year from what? Oh, okay. So yeah, that probably did a pretty good job coming down from 1,700 to 100 orders in the most recent year. So let's apply that. And then same story from here, load it up with metric filters to give Pulse the ability to cut into it across whatever discipline we want. Big wins, that's a number. We want that going up. Want to make sure it's identifying. Certainly in this case, I definitely want to identify where there are outliers. I think by design, it's only really going to keep things that are of interest. And now I have an ugly, choppy, but valid and useful and actionable Pulse metric that is pretty custom. It's a little trickier, a little more clever, as far as we needed to go into the advanced editor and build ourselves a filter against a number. And maybe I've done a decent job to come up with an example that would not definitely get baked into your published data source. So I can see I have more big wins with these guys than those guys. What happened with the Han manufacturer? Do we need to investigate that? Maybe month to date is not the way I want to look at this, right? It comes out kind of ugly, but presumably, we might be able to track over a longer period of time and produce something that's a little more visually appealing and complete, but still able to give me actionability and insight into where we're winning, who our best customers are. I don't know what by virtue of the filter. But that's me, and so thank you for humoring me. I did not follow that one, so we will. And the rest of the time is yours. Thank you for having me and for being interested in our products and in analytics in general. Hope that Pulse represents something that you'll also be interested in. It's a new way to play. And so I think to wrap up on some of the philosophical motivation for why we're doing this, there was a study done, not by us, I'm sure we sponsored it because it feeds this narrative. 30% of the business world is actually taking advantage of and has adopted business intelligence. We would like that number to be bigger. I live in the 30% as that dashboard interested guy, but not everybody does, and that's okay. And so there need to be other ways to play if we're going to influence productivity and keep people making the right decisions based in truth and in data. And so this new medium is very hand in hand with our transitioning philosophy as we've been acquired now many, many years ago, at this point, 5+ years ago, by Salesforce. But meeting the user in the flow of work is an evolution of our mantra. Even our company motto, we help people see and understand data, has evolved. We help people see, understand, and act on their data. And so hopefully this is just another weapon in the analyst toolkit and in your toolkit for delivering productive, data-driven insights to people who should use them, even if they don't want to.
Thank you very much, Tim. This was fantastic from my perspective. It was great to see it kind of go through end to end and answered a lot of the vague questions that I had about the product. So I'm looking forward to playing with it in our environment. And hopefully some other folks got a lot out of it. But thank you.
My pleasure. And thank you. And thank you. I'm noticing you asked a question. We tend to be very API forward, and there is a Tableau Pulse API. This is going to be a bit of a hip fire. A buddy of mine who is good at this stuff is much better at this stuff than I am. I'm no coder, but he whipped up a little demo environment using the Superstore data set and the Pulse API. So what you see up here are little cards that are of his own web design, and the ability to either flip through them the way he's drawn them up. I think there's some capacity for me to click into these or like cycle through them. Right. So this is more of an art of the possible. This guy used our JavaScript API, our Tableau Pulse API, a bit of Python and HTML. And so he's built this whole web app, but you can do a lot of cool stuff with this. And I think something to keep in mind as a fadeaway that is the feature that underpins Pulse is something called VizQL Data Service. I don't know if we have any like wide facing. Okay, hold on. There we go. That's real. Yeah, so maybe this is something just to have in your mind as a future Googleable. This is the mechanism under the hood for Pulse. Pulse is all that we just saw, but at the core of it, there is a Tableau data source that can be pinged differently than we've ever been able to do it. And it's courtesy of this feature. So we are hotly developing this in accordance with our interests and objective to make Tableau very extensible. It helps with our integrating with Salesforce story. It helps with creating things like Tableau Pulse, but also insert developer idea here becomes much more possible, where applications and not even humans can go and get data from a Tableau data source to then use in decision making. So it's a big step forward that we haven't fully formally taken, but we're taking it, and its initial implementation is via Pulse, and there's going to be a lot more specific, as you can see here, we're already getting more formal to my surprise, public documentation and chit chat and blog posts about what it is, how it works, how it can really kind of blow up the whole game of getting analytics into automation and other processes that don't involve me going in and spending 10 minutes in a dashboard.
Yeah, this opens up infinite possibilities for your data. Amazing. Okay. Very good. All right. Well,
I've overstayed my welcome and overshown. Thank you so much.
thank you again. This was really valuable, and yeah, I will send out a recording and materials. I know you shared a link. If there's anything else you want to share afterwards, let me know, and we'll get that out. All right.
Yep,
Thanks,
I got a couple follow-up items for you wondering about user functions and Spanish Pulse. Stay tuned. I'll send the leaders here an email with follow-up.
All right.
Thank
Be
you.
well in the
Thank you.
meantime.